of course, we are completely focused on mainly two autochthonous grapes, which are Aglianico and Fiano. But at the same time, we are having a little bit of fun with the international grape and specifically with Cabernet Franc, because Cabernet Franc is not only incredibly interesting from a winemaking perspective, but also it has a character that makes it quite fit with hot climate and with climate change. So I'd say we always love to experiment. And I think being organic with this kind of grapes makes everything a little bit more fun.
Fascinating people with stories to share, fabulous wines and the best local foods to accompany them, and beautiful places to discover and visit. All of this and more on Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today we travel to Puglia, to the northern part of the region, to the Alta Murgia and the prestigious wine zone of Castel del Monte, to meet my guest, Vito Palumbo of Tenuta Bocca di Lupo, which is one of the flagship estates of Tormaresca, the Antinori family's project in Puglia. Welcome, Vito. Many thanks for being my guest this morning. How are you today? And is it a beautiful day in the Alta Murgia?
It is actually. Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful day, kind of cool breeze, but sunny and blue sky.
Oh, that sounds very nice. It's a little gray here in southern England, so I'm imagining that beautiful light that I'm sure you have there. Vita, for our listeners who are located all around the world, can you take us to Puglia? Can you take us to the Alta Murgia, to this wine zone named after an octagonal castle possibly designed by the Holy Roman Emperor Federico II, Frederick II. Can you describe where you are, what the landscape is like? Because this Alta Murgia is very different from other parts of Puglia, very different from the Salento, for example, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Let's say Puglia in general, it's always been the gate to the Eastern world. So we've been first with the Greeks, but then afterwards we've had so many cultures that came and visited and enriched the region. But let's say the imaginary of Puglia for everyone, it's mainly the red soil of Salento or Valle d'Itria, the sea. Alta Murgia is completely different. In a way, it's a bit of a nowhere's land because we're right in between Basilicata, Campania, and of course Puglia, and we're on a hill, so we are roughly around 350 meters above the sea level, and it's a very poor white calcareous soil. So quite the opposite of what people have in mind when they think of Puglia.
Okay, and the wine zone of Castel del Monte, of course, this octagonal castle, which is such a landmark feature. Can you tell us a little bit about that? A little brief about the history of this area, about Federico II. I wonder if he planted vines around his castle because he was very fond of wine, wasn't he?
I mean, that's something I think we will never know. We like to think that, but we already have doubts about the real use of the Castel del Monte, this octagonal, unique castle that he built. What we do know is that he was known as, in Latin, stupor mundi. It was like, say, it would astonish the world because he was the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire to really build a bridge between Europe and the Arabian world. So imagine that we are in a time of the Crusades. And for Federico II, Crusades were not really about conquering a piece of land, but rather exchange knowledge. So in the court of Federico II, that spent most of his life in southern Italy, between Puglia, Sicily, and Naples, he really had in his court all the best scientists coming from the Arabian world. In a time where, let's say, the Arabian world was, in a way, even more developed than Europe. We were in what the historian called the Dark Ages. So that's why it's so important for, let's say, the history of Europe, but also of southern Italy. Another beautiful example is that I mean, again, we believe so through the records, but he created the first public university that is still active now, which is the University of Naples, named after him, the Federico II.
Okay, so this polyglot Holy Roman Emperor, born in Palermo, I believe, with Norman heritage as well as German, and as you say, a very enlightened ruler that brought a quest for knowledge, for language, for literature, for the arts, and embraced the Arab culture not as an enemy at the time of the Crusades, but very much an appreciation of what different cultures could share and learn from each other. And of course, this remarkable octagonal castle that you mentioned, built with those limestone blocks out of the same soil which nourishes the vines. Vito, can you share with us your own story? You're from this area. Your family has links to Bocca di Lupo, I think, and you've been instrumental in helping to shape the modern identity of this prestigious winery. Can you share with us the story of Tenuta Bocca di Lupo?
So yeah, there's, let's say, the story of my family are quite intertwined with the one of Bocca di Lupo. Of course, Bocca di Lupo and Tormaresca now they are owned and created by the Antinori family, and they really revolutionized, or let's say, stealing a word from the Tuscan heritage, they ignited the renaissance of the Puglian territory. At the same time, my family has been producing wine for roughly 100 years, but of course, within an environment which was the Puglian one that was mainly focused on quantity rather than quality. So my family was a producer of bulk wine. So bulk wine that would travel throughout Europe and in the States. Again, large quantities, not much focus on quality. And then, let's say, in the mid 80s, my father, Peppino, together with Vittorio Gancia, were thinking about an area of Puglia that could produce fine wines. Again, in a moment where 90% of the production in Puglia was rather bulk wine. And they found the Bocca di Lupo, this unique place, this amazing place. I mean, we were very, very lucky that Vittorio Gancia was a friend of the Marchese Piero Antinori. And so Vittorio Gancia invited Piero Antinori to visit the estate. And so that's how the, let's say, the journey of Bocca di Lupo started. So Bocca di Lupo first, and in 1998, and then Piero Antinori and the Antinori family, they invested also in Salento, in the Masseria Maime estate, and that was the start of Tormaresca. So let's say one of the few wineries in Puglia to represent two completely different terroirs. So the sunny, red soil rich, close to the seaside area of Salento, and the uniqueness of Bocca di Lupo in the upper area of the Castel del Monte appellation.
Okay, Vito, you touch on something that I think it's quite important for our listeners to understand, and that's really how recent the story is of this renaissance of fine wine in Puglia, but not just. Really, it's a story that the Marchesi Antinori were involved with, really in Tuscany, and really revaluing wines and bringing the ability to produce the potential to produce wines of world class from all over Italy, but certainly from the south. And as you say, Puglia was known primarily for bulk wines, wines that in many cases were sent up north to be used for the production of vermouth, for bulk wines to make inexpensive wines that were sold around the world. But this concept of fine wine is relatively recent. You know, we're talking, I guess, Vito, we're talking about not much more than 40 years, and yet it's been quite a revolution, hasn't it?
Yes, I have to say that, I mean, I think of Marchese Piero Antinori as a revolutionary figure in the wine world because this change that we are describing for Puglia, in a way, it's a change that has happened to Italy in the last 50, 60 years. And so, of course, everyone thinks of the revolution of the Super Tuscans, thinking about Antinori. with Tignanello and Solaia or Guado al Tasso. But at the same time, I think there's even a more crucial revolution that Antinori carried out many years ago, which was the one that overcame, let's say, the idea of a merchant way of business in the wine world. So again, buying bulk wine, labeling, and then selling it abroad. While Antinori really was one of the first to think of the idea of an estate grown wine. So now Antinori, wherever it is, either Puglia or Piedmont or Tuscany, we always produce wines from our own grape, which is something that we now take for granted. But let's say 50 years ago was quite revolutionary. So in Puglia, I would say that things started a little later than that. So as you said, I would say that Puglia really changed the approach 30 years ago. I say by the end of the 90s, even though there were already historical wineries that I'm really glad to mention, like De Castris, Rivera, Conti Zecca. But let's say there was a long way to walk to get where other regions of Italy are. And I think that now Puglia has a bit more chances to be right up there, also thanks to the success that the region is achieving in terms of tourism.
Okay, that's a really good overview and a distinction, and how, as you say, the Antinori family really changed that mentality of Chianti sold in the straw-covered fiasco, first in Tuscany with the creation of the Super Tuscans, Tignanello, and then Solaia. But as you say, this concept of estate wines and producing the best from whatever region that the family would choose to work in. Now, your father, Beppino, you mentioned, was looking for somewhere that where the potential to produce high quality wines could be realized in Puglia, and he came to the Alta Murgia, to this quite a harsh and singular land, isn't it? I recall visiting, the winters are quite cold. There's a high diurnal range of temperatures, and there's a particular soil, this karst limestone, this white limestone that the Castel del Monte castle was built from. And that limestone is one of the keys to the viticulture, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, in this case, I always love to take reference from the ancient Greek. So I always think of the soil of Bocca di Lupo a bit like Sparta, where only, let's say, the bravest, the strongest men would survive that kind of society in the same way, with a very poor soil, karstic, as you mentioned. Then the vines grow stronger with more character. They have to dig deep into the soil to get nutrition. It's a soil that's always very low humidity because it's not able at all to hold the water. And I think that's what really makes Bocca di Lupo special. As you mentioned again, also the diurnal range is very important because we have hot, dry days and sunny days, and then very cold nights in the wintertime, but chilly nights also in the summertime. So all of this together, and the salinity coming, because this limestone is mainly coming from oceanic rocks. So this kind of salinity gives the wine a beautiful vibrancy. All this together, I think, gives Bocca di Lupo a uniqueness that I have to say goes also beyond a little bit the appellation itself. I don't want to be controversial, but I have to say that when I think of Bocca di Lupo, I'm not even thinking of Puglia or Castel del Monte. I'm thinking of one of those amazing special places that we have in Italy that are different from their surroundings. If you think of Castel del Monte, you have a large part of the appellation that it's either table grape, so that let's say the edible grape, or olive production, olive oil production and olives production. So, and also it's more flatland. So Bocca di Lupo is really at the top of the hills that, let's say, that travels towards west. In fact, we look at Vulture from the balcony of our estate. And that's why I always, of course, I'm from Puglia. I love Puglia. Let's say, hold up the flag of the Puglian wines. But at the same time, I have to stress that Bocca di Lupo is quite its own special thing, and it's really not comparable to other areas of the region. And I mean, I think it's showed also by not only the style of the wine, but even the wine itself that we produce. Let's say the grape that we are working on.
Well, that's a very, very good distinction. And I think it's also important to highlight for our listeners how Bocca di Lupo has this unique position. And, we tend to think about southern Italy as hot, and we have ideas that it's always, the sun is always shining. But we're really talking about this more Spartan, as you say, Spartan landscape of altitude with these high ranges of temperature that give the unique conditions for producing the range of wine. Now, the philosophy is also key to that, Vito, isn't it? You're working primarily with the autochthonous grapes of Puglia, and you work organically. Is that right? And why have you chosen to work organically?
Yeah, we do work organically, so all the wines are organic wine certified. I think it's not really the final aim. Like, let's say, we are not working because we want to produce organic wines, but more of an opportunity that we catched. Because I also have to say that it's a little easier to be organic in such a poor soil, of course, because you have less vegetation, therefore less insect. And so it's an opportunity that we were able to get. It's a little challenging because anyway, let's say, you don't have second chances when you are organic. So you always have to prevent, you have to be present, you have to know every inch of the vineyard surface. Again, to be proactive, let's say, you don't have many weapons to fight diseases. You have, I mean, a little bit of copper, like the usual organic procedures, sovescio in the farming. But again, it's an opportunity that I believe also helps what I mentioned before, helps this character that the vines have at Bocca di Lupo, that then it's reflected in the wines we release.
Okay, and I guess it must give those vines a little more resilience in changing climatic conditions.
True. That's why also I guess we are gonna talk about it later on. That's why also where we of course we are completely focused on mainly two autochthonous grape, which are Aglianico and Fiano. But at the same time, we are having a little bit of fun with the international grape and specifically with Cabernet Franc, because Cabernet Franc is not only incredibly interesting from a winemaking perspective, but also it has a character that makes it quite fit with hot climate and with climate change. So I'd say we always love to experiment. And I think being organic with this kind of grapes makes everything a little bit more fun.
Okay. Well, let's dive into a few of the wines so our listeners can gain an idea of something of your range, because you make a large variety of wines. Can we begin maybe with the white, with the Pietra Bianca? Can you tell us about this wine?
Pietrabianca really reflects what I was mentioning. As I say, this dual soul where we have the autochthonous grape and the international grape varieties that, by the way, have always been present in the area. I mean, our past of bulk wine producer would mean that we would produce Chardonnay, Pinot Bianco, Pinot Grigio. So it's not anything new. It's grape that we've had throughout the decades. Pietrabianca is an unusual blend of Chardonnay and Fiano with a beautiful winemaking idea, having the Chardonnay spending a few months in small French barrels and completing malolactic fermentation, while the Fiano would only be in stainless steel tanks. Because Fiano, I remember my father always used to say, is the red grape of the whites, because it has a structure and a texture that doesn't really require malolactic fermentation, even if you want to age the wine. So the result is, I think it's a wine that speaks an international vocabulary, kind of, let's say, Burgundy inspired, Chablis inspired, but at the same time with this beautiful identity twist given by the Fiano, which personally I believe it will be one of the queen white grapes of Italy in the coming years.
Yes, yes. And that's interesting that you're combining that richness with the freshness as well. I guess that acidity will be keeping the wine very vibrant.
Exactly. We always want to have vibrancy, like a vertical approach in all of our wines, even more when we are in Puglia, because we want to showcase our uniqueness, and that's mainly given by the verticality, by the freshness, by the vibrancy. Also, because let's say in our vision, we want to produce wines that people can enjoy. So not only intellectual challenges, but also something a little bit more joyful and a little bit more on the pleasant side. So I really
Okay.
believe that a simple wine doesn't mean an easy wine. A simple wine is a wine that is enjoyable and without, let's say, undervaluing the different layers and the different nuances that the wine should have in its complexity.
Okay, so that sense of bevabilità, of drinkability, but in the best sense, a wine that, as you say, is a joy to drink with everything that it has within it. Can we turn to a grape that is associated with Castel del Monte, mainly grown in the Alta Murgia? I don't think it spreads much beyond, does it? The Nero di Troia and your Ettore.
Ah,
Tell us about Nero di Troia.
Nero di Troia, that's a funny story because we have like 5 hectares of Nero di Troia. Every vintage, we produce a wine named Ettore, but we don't distribute it. So it's a funny story because we only have it in our estate because we're still not happy about it, not from a quality perspective, but from an identity perspective. I'm sorry about that, but I have to quote my father once again. With Nero di Troia, he always said that there's been a dictatorship of clones, like the Star Wars movie, because basically the clones, the selection of clones that were available for Nero di Troia weren't really reflecting the ancient autochthonous Nero di Troia that we had. So he tried and he was in the process of creating a muscle selection from wild vines in the area. And so, let's say, we will release the wine and distribute the wine officially when not only the quality will be there, but when we will be fully confident that it reflects what Nero di Troia was, which was a grape that would be a little bit closer to a Nebbiolo or a Sangiovese rather than, let's say, a rich red grape like often it's present now in Puglia.
So lighter in color with high acidity and tannin.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's closer, let's say, in between Aglianico and Nebbiolo in a way. It's a big stretch, and the purists of winemaking will get mad at me. But let's say, just to give a pop comparison.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's turn to Aglianico, perhaps to Trentangeli, your Castel del Monte, Aglianico. How does Aglianico, you say you can, from their balcony, see Volture. So Aglianico, of course, a great grape of Campania and Basilicata. How does it express itself uniquely in your area, in the Alta Murgia?
In this case, let's say uniqueness, it's quite easy to understand because when I said we see at Vulture from the balcony, I always say that we are basically in the eastern part of the latitude of Aglianico. Because if you draw a line that crosses southern Italy through the Apennini, the southern Apennini, well, you get Castel del Monte, and then you have Vulture, and then you have Taurasi. That's the area where Aglianico has always been present. Of course, the public knows much more the Aglianico from Vulture and the Taurasi, but those are two volcanic areas. So the difference with Bocca di Lupo's Aglianico is the fact that our soil is oceanic rocks. So in a way, both with Trentangeli and Bocca di Lupo, which is our crew of Aglianico, let's say our 100% Aglianico, I would say that we have kind of a more Mediterranean style, where the wine is a little bit more open, a little less tight, with tannins that are, of course, still there, still astringent as they should be with Aglianico, but with in a little bit more of a smoother way, and always with a bit of this hints of the what we call macchia mediterranea, so sage, rosemary, together with the most, let's say, signature hints of Aglianico, like flint, tobacco, plum. That's why I think it's a beautiful expression of Aglianico, completely different from the other amazing expression of Aglianico present in Campania and Basilicata.
Okay, that's a really, really good description. Can you briefly also tell us about the Cabernet Franc? Not a wine I'm familiar with. Tell us about how Cabernet Franc expresses itself in your territory.
Well, if you allow me, first I want to explain why we've been working on it. Because, let's say, our Cabernet Franc, we have roughly 3 hectares, but in the end of the day, we only use a small single vineyard to release 3,000 bottles of a name called Arso, which is a name, even though in English could sound interesting, but it means burned in ancient, let's say, in a more Aulic Italian expression. So it takes inspiration by the peasant cuisine and the farming of that area, because the farmers used to burn the fields of wheat after the harvest to use it again with a black flour called grano arso. And so, let's say, Arso and the Cabernet Franc project, it's a bit of a way for us to provoke. And it's also tightly related to what we've been experiencing with Aglianico. We believe that Aglianico, it's one of the best grapes in Italy, together with Nebbiolo and the Sangiovese from Chianti Classico. But we always felt that both collectors, journalists, wine lovers have always been kind of scared of Aglianico. Maybe it's a little bit, it's a very austere grape. So we always felt there was some kind of a prejudice around Aglianico. So to kind of, let's say, to showcase Bocca di Lupo in an easier way for us, we said, well, why don't we work on an international grape that people could really compare with things they drink, they know, they love, so that it's a little easier for them to understand the quality and the excellence within our estate. So that's why for around 10 years we've been working on Arso. And after 10 years, because we released the first vintage was 2020, but we harvested Cabernet Franc since 2008. So we've been working on it, and you know better than me that Cabernet Franc, it's a grape that it's not easy to have, let's say, not all year, all vintages is able to express itself in the best way. So let's say with the 2020 vintage, we really thought we would be able to showcase a wine that could, I wouldn't say compete, but stand together with the best wines of Italy, either the Super Tuscans or the best Barolo. I mean, not of course in terms of style, but in terms of quality. So that's why we did that. And I think it's a beautiful expression of Cabernet Franc because it is not green as people would expect from a place that anyway it's kind of a new world into the old world, but it has this beautiful silky red grape feeling, so a red fruit. And I think, I mean, we need to wait to see what the aging potential will showcase, but I believe it's a wine that is going to surprise a lot of people, but most importantly, is going to be able to showcase that Puglia can deliver wines at the level of the best Super Tuscan and the best Barolo of Italy.
Oh, well, I look forward to sampling that. Final wine, just a brief word on. This is your Caloro Moscato di Trani. Can you tell us about this? Would you call that a dessert wine? A sweet wine, certainly, but with a lot of freshness.
Yeah, it is a passito. So, funny enough, people would do the equation. Southern Italy, passito, it's going to be jam, marmalade, while it has a beautiful acidity. So, that is able to balance the residual sugar. Moscato Reale, it's Moscato di Trani Reale. It's a grape that has a beautiful cluster with a big berry with thick, crunchy skin. So after the harvest, we have the grape on racks under the sun for a week. It's a bit of a headache because if it starts raining, then we have to bring everything inside and then back outside. So let's say our chief winemaker is always stressed about Caloro, but it's a beautiful wine. And again, the name even is takes inspiration by a game of word between heat and gold, calore and oro. So that's
Okay.
why Caloro. And so it's another interesting one with this apricot honey feeling that it's perfect, not only with dessert, but I would say more with cheese, with aged cheese. And the Castel del Monte area is famous for its Murgia cheese that are amazing, coming from the Podolic breed. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
a good pairing.
Okay, well, that's a good time then, perhaps, to turn to the gastronomy of Puglia and the Murge, but also perhaps international foods that you think these very special wines from Puglia would pair with. Can you tell us a little bit about the cuisine of Puglia and how some of these wines pair well, but also if you think that there are other cuisines that your wines pair with particularly well?
So just as I've been a little bit controversial on the description of the Castel del Monte appellation, at the same time, on the cuisine, I have to be incredibly chauvinistic. So I strongly believe that Puglia's cuisine is one of the absolute best in Italy and in the world, because I think we have a diversity that is incredible. So, of course, if you think of Puglia and the coastline, it's all about the raw fish, the seafood, the sea urchin, mussels, and it's a beauty. But at the same time, we have inland, so in the Murgia Hills, that let's not forget, it starts, let's say, in Minervino Murgia, where we are based, but it ends in Ostuni, so 300 kilometers south. And there we have a cuisine made of, again, meat, thanks to our own breed of that is the Podolic one, present in Puglia since medieval times. But then we have amazing cheese, the burrata, we have the pecorino, the cacio, the ricotta, and then the vegetable. I've never found a place like Puglia with such a diversity of vegetables and such a quality. And I have to mention a restaurateur that is a friend of the winery and the family, who's Pietro Zito. His place is called Antichi Sapori, in a little place close to our estate called Monte Grosso, and he has its own. Let's say everything that you eat there is produced by him. He has its own garden. Every season he has different vegetables, and it has let's say a precision of flavors. The Puglian cuisine, and of course Pietro Zito, who's, let's say, the climax of our cuisine, that I could only find perhaps in the Japanese cuisine. So you were asking me about international cuisine that could fit well with our wines. Well, I would say the Japanese one. And I'm not talking, of course, about sushi or sashimi, but I'm talking about all the other side of the Japanese cuisine that is a little less known, that is based on vegetables and meat. I think both the Puglian cuisine and the Japanese one have this precision, this pureness of the flavors of each ingredient, where you don't need, which, I mean, now that I think about it, it's a little bit also connected to our approach to winemaking. So we want the grape to be showcased. We don't want to have the ideas of the winemaker that overshadows the feature of the grape. The same with the cuisine. We want the ingredients in the spotlight, and then a chef has to be the right orchestra maestro that balance all the ingredients. So let's say again, Japanese cuisine, Pulian cuisine, and anyway, anything that is good.
Okay, now that's a great description of all of the wonderful things that that one can enjoy in Puglia and this precision of cuisine, precision of wine as well. I'm sure you've made us all want to visit Puglia, and many of our listeners do travel to places that we highlight. So can you tell us a little bit about hospitality at Bocca di Lupo? Can our listeners visit you?
Absolutely. And I mean, for us, it's still an undiscovered area of Italy and of Puglia because everyone travels to Valle d'Itria and Salento. So we are always incredibly happy to welcome wine lovers, also just tourists that love beauty and good wines and good food. So it's open to the public, of course, on reservation because we have limited availability. There's the chance to visit, to taste the wines, even to have lunch or dinner. And sometimes we host beautiful events. We always try to support the cultural development of the region. So we sponsor a beautiful music festival called Locus Festival. And every year we host a concert of this festival at the estate. So, for instance, this year in July, we're going to host the concert of Johnny Marr, who's the guitar player of the Smiths. So in the past, we've had Vinicio Capossela, we had Kings of Convenience. So we always try to put together culture, food, wine, and traveling. I mean, that's people that love beauty love all those things together. So please come visit us.
Okay, so culture, food, wine, travel, beauty. That's a wonderful invitation to all our listeners. Vito, it's been a real pleasure meeting you here. Thank you so much for telling us the story of Bocca di Lupo, explaining this unique territory, the Alta Murgia, and highlighting the wines that you produce and the foods and hospitality in the region too. I hope to meet you in person before too long, perhaps at Opera Wine, which I think you'll be attending. Is that right? What wine are you bringing to Opera?
We're bringing Bocca di Lupo, which is our obsession, if if I may say so, because it's our 100% Aglianico, and it's I think they say Aglianico is the Barolo of southern Italy. My father used to say Barolo is the Aglianico of the north, because
Right.
Aglianico has 2,000 years of history.
Yes.
But I mean, please, let's meet. I want you to try Bocca di Lupo.
Well, I'll look forward to that. I'll look forward to that. Well, in the meantime, thank you so much again for being with us this morning, and have a great day. Buona giornata.
Thank you for having me, and have a great day, you too.
We hope today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast has transported you to somewhere special. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at ItalianWinePodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.